Alright, so now I've imported most of the drawings that I need, and I'm going to show you how to start doing the extrusions. In order to do this, we need to get our drawing nice and organized first. So you notice I have all my drawings on different layers so I can easily turn them on and off. This will make your life a lot easier, trust me. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move things to this point of origin, and that's going to be helpful to keep us aligned. So I'm going to basically call this corner of the building our point of origin on all these drawings, and we're going to figure out where these plans go in terms of how high they are apart from each other. And if we look on this elevation or even the section, it tells us this note about finished floor line. So I'm going to go back into the original drawing to be able to see that a little bit clearer. And the finished floor basically is what you stand on. And so that measurement of a finished floor dimension is really, really handy when you're doing dimensioning. So if we zoom in here, we'll see that it says basement line and the first floor line, and it's a difference of 9 feet 10 inches. That basically tells us the difference between those plans. So we're going to use the plans as our 0 line, and then it goes up 13 feet 9 inches to our second floor. So those are really helpful dimensions to help us understand this. So go back, just double check 9 feet 10 inches, right? So I'm going to take my point of origin for my first floor plan and move that over here to this. And it's fine because these are on, if these were on the same layer, if we tried to move these, there'd be a major problem. So the fact that they're on 2 different layers makes this really easy that we can separate them. So I'm going to lift it, make sure that I'm still on the blue axis, and it was 9 feet 10 inches, and I'm just going to plug that in. And suddenly those two are a difference of 9 feet 10 inches. Alright, so the second one, so go back and double check how much higher the second floor was. Let's see, 13 feet 9 inches from the first floor. So go back into our drawing, and we'll select our second floor. And I've left the labels on this drawing. You can tell why, because it just makes things easier moving it around. It gives us some identifying information. So I'm going to lay this on top of the first floor. It should recognize my intersection point. So there we go, face on group. And we're going to move that up. I've already forgotten my number, 13 feet 9 inches. So this is where it's helpful to keep that window open. Make sure on the blue axis and not on some other random axis when you're pulling this up, otherwise your drawing won't be straight. Alright, so now that's separated. Okay. So I'm going to turn off the top 2 plans so we just have the basement one right now. The next thing I'm going to do is rotate these elevations or flip them so they're in the right orientation. And what I usually do for this is make sure you're on layer 0. I build a little dummy 3D box. And that 3D box is really pretty handy when you're doing these kind of manipulations. And I just make it a group. And that the whole reason of making something a group means that you can't select a face individually and accidentally move it. So this means we need to turn it. So I'm going to select this one and turn it by using my dummy block. So I'm going to pull out my green axis and rotate it up until it says I'm on the blue axis. So basically I've turned that drawing up. And this is actually the back elevation. So we need to rotate this, otherwise it's going to be a mirrored image, right? So let's rotate that. Just use this guy. Oops. And you can see I wasn't on axis there. So we'll redo that again. If any point you're drawing isn't straight, you won't actually be able to construct a model that's accurate. Okay. And let's move this guy to our points of origin on the basement. And our basement plan, so this is something to note, is actually starts down here. So I'm just going to draw a little dummy line to basically where that basement plan hits. Make sure I'm on the blue axis. So this is going to be the point that I move this plan from, okay, or this elevation, excuse me. And this lines up. Sometimes it gets a little squirrely here when you're trying to move things. And what can be helpful is instead of just moving it, copy it. So if you hold down your Alt or Option key, that copies it. And for some reason, SketchUp seems to like that a little bit better sometimes. So that's basically where it lines up in the building. And you'll see that this is slightly off because we have a bowed window. So we'll just move this over a little bit so it's now in line. So those are pretty much lining up now, our edges of the building, right? Okay. I'm going to get rid of this one since it's copied. It's fine. And now I'm going to do it with the front elevation. Same thing. I'm going to turn this guy up with my dummy block and move him over. So on here, it's kind of tricky because we can't really tell what is the ground level, what's above, because obviously the ground level changes if it's a slightly sloped site. So what I'm going to use is something that's a known point on this plan, or excuse me, on this elevation. So basically where this banding hits, that's a known point that wraps around the entire building at one level. So I'm just going to draw a little, again, dummy box that extrudes over here. And it doesn't matter which direction you make it. This is basically just something that's going to help us reference how this drawing is aligned. Okay, so now I'm going to take this guy, hold my Option key so I copy it, and it seems to make it easier to move it. And I'm going to get it on that face and move it back until I'm right at the edge of the building. So right there is where the building starts, right? Keep it on that face. Alright, and we can get rid of this guy because he was just helping us line things up. So now you've got the basic elements that you need to actually create your model. Alright, so we know that the building's that tall, and I can start tracing elements from this building. So I'm going to turn my elevations off briefly. Go in here, and I'm going to make a model layer, and everything I draw is going to be on that model layer, which will make things easier. And for now, I'm just going to do a box, just tracing over these basic elements, and make sure this is straight. So make sure I'm on the correct one there. And I'm going to turn one of my elevations on, and I know that the box of this building basically goes up to that point there. Okay, so you can just roughly estimate, and if we move it down we can see, oh, there we go, that's a little bit better. And now I can start to go in and add some of the details, add the roof line, so I know that the roof line, if I trace over on my model here, and I'll find a midpoint because I know that this is a symmetrical building, right? And if something doesn't close, that basically means that you don't have a parallel line. So you want to go back and find out where your errors are here. So there's something in here that isn't quite aligned properly that's making me not be able to close this object. Alright, so let's see what it is. And sometimes SketchUp can be kind of finicky, so there's a facet that's changed there. Alright, so I have to go in and find out where that facet change is. And what might happen is as I was tracing my plan, I might not have stayed on the correct axis. So let's see. Yeah, that looks accurate. Let's turn our elevation on again. So we started with a midpoint, draw up. Maybe it likes this side better. Let's try that. Alright, so these are just highlighting some of the issues you might encounter, and what can happen is sometimes you need to go back to your original plan and start your extrusion again. Oops, don't accidentally delete your other bits of your drawing. So by showing you guys when something goes wrong, don't get too worried. You can go back and actually figure out what the problem is, and because you've been really good about keeping your layers together, it's going to be really easy to change that and find where things went wrong. Something else that can be really useful is actually locking this, so now I can't select it, which can be really quite nice when you're working. So I might actually lock all my drawings, and that means I can't accidentally select them and do something with it that I don't want to. Okay. All right, so let's go back to our basement plan. We'll try it one more time. I'm going to try a slightly different idea this time. I'm going to build a rectangle, because that way I know that my pieces are accurate, and pull those up based on the elevation. Good. And now you see that time it worked. Okay, so there's something a little bit wonky in that first model. No worries. I'm going to copy this and actually flip it along an axis, so that's an easy way to make something symmetrical. So I'm going to flip along the red direction and just nest it back up there. So now I've made a little mirrored part. And if I had looked, I'm going to pull this back, if I had looked at the sides of the building, so we're going to go back here, we'll see that on the elevations, this is actually what's called a mansard roof, so it goes back in the same direction both ways. And so to make that in the model, I'm basically going to take this little square, copy it out, rotate it, and that's going to tell us how far back. Oops. And don't worry, sometimes you have to zoom in and out. You might have lost a bit of your drawing. So let's move that. So that's basically saying this line here needs to move back to that point. Okay. And I can do it from my other side if I flip this. If I change the orientation of this object, so flip along green direction, copy it over to a point over here. Okay. And even though these aren't connected, SketchUp's pretty smart, and it knows if I want to go back to this point. Oops. So basically these things are in line. We want to make sure we're keeping that highlighted color on, because that means things are straight. And go back to that point. So we've just made a little mansard roof, which is a fairly complicated form, but you guys see that with a couple keystrokes, it's pretty easy. We'll get rid of all our guidelines there. Okay. So I would keep developing and working this model up to get out some of the basics, pull up the chimney, maybe do some of the windows. And what's handy is that I can actually maybe copy and paste elements of this elevation on either side, and actually copy and paste those back onto the drawing. So I can move bits of this right onto the facade. Alright, so that's the basics of how to actually extrude a model from a series of drawings from HAB.